We are back with our panel of local legal experts helping us break down the Derek Chauvin trial. Elon law professor Steve Friedland, UNC law professor Ted Shaw, and Cami Chavis, professor of law at Wake Forest University. Let's talk more about some of the testimony that we heard this week. Cami, at least 3 medical experts took the stand this week answering questions about George Floyd's oxygen levels and defining the word asphyxia and the nature of overdose deaths. You had mentioned it before, but what's the significance of bringing in multiple experts versus just one?
So the significance here is, of course, the burden is always on the prosecution to prove every element beyond a reasonable doubt. But the defense here has a theory, they've tried to assert several different theories, and one of those is that it wasn't Derek Chauvin's knee on the neck. It was an overdose, a fentanyl overdose. And so we've seen, again, testimony that I believe refutes that, really subverts that defense, because you had several experts testifying that it wasn't a fatal level of toxicity, and that it was actually the pressure on his neck that caused his death, that caused his heart and lungs to stop working, the asphyxia.
Steve,
Just want to add something in, if I could.
Yeah, absolutely.
Experts are there to help the jury. They often fill in gaps and they educate the jury. So the prosecution is making it really clear about its case through the experts. And that's why we're seeing as many as we are. And that's why they're trying to lay it out. So when the jury gets into the jury room, they will be able to say, and based on what the experts have said, here is an answer that's going to refute, as Cami said, the defense claim. So experts are educators, and we are a society of experts. We love them today. So lawyers are going to use experts generally, but in this case, you see a lot of them because they're going to be really helpful in explaining some very difficult issues.
Steve, this week we've heard a lot of the term use of force. Why is this such a tricky thing to prove?
Well, especially with police, they're entitled to use the force reasonably necessary to restrain someone. But what does that mean? And I think as Ted talked about before, we see police departments have policies. And now we have to educate the jury on different kinds of restraints, what's allowed, when do they allow it, how long. So here, there are going to be 2 main questions. Is this a proper method of restraint at all? And if it is, for how long? Because at least some of the testimony said, even if it is proper, it was way too long. It was totally unnecessary and should not have been done. So they're going to have to lay this out. Remember, as Cami just said, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a really high burden. So the prosecutor is going to do whatever it can to make it clear there's no reasonable doubt here about these elements.
A breathing expert said Floyd died from lack of oxygen. First, let's listen to that testimony.
Does that show up on autopsy?
No, it does not.
And the fact that it doesn't, does that mean anything to you whatsoever?
It has no meaning.
And why not?
Because low oxygen is a functional thing, just like an arrhythmia is a functional thing. It doesn't leave a fingerprint on the autopsy.
And
Ted, how big of a role, I'm sorry to interrupt, how big of a role do you think that this testimony about breathing will play in the trial, and why?
I'm sorry, I missed one word. Testimony about what?
About breathing.
Breathing, that's what I thought you said. Well, it's big because they anticipate that the defense, and they can show this, or they can anticipate this because of cross-examination also. But the question of whether or not he was deprived of oxygen, whether he died because of the knee on the neck, whether he could breathe. I mean, there's testimony that he died because he could not breathe, and there's detailed testimony about how other marks on his face reflected the fact that he was on the pavement and shifting his face and his head and trying to get into a position where he could breathe. Of course, there's the now well-known "I can't breathe" statement. This isn't the only case that came up, but this is literally what he was trying to do. He was trying to take a breath and another breath and another breath and survive. So I think that was very graphic testimony. I would imagine it's going to be important to the jury.
Steve, we have. Oh, I'm sorry. Continue, Cami.
I think another really interesting piece here is you hear Derek Chauvin on that video saying, well, if you can talk, you can breathe, you're using up a lot of oxygen. And what was really significant about the testimony was the expert saying, no, that's not right. Just because someone can talk doesn't mean that they are having an adequate amount of oxygen. And that is very significant. And I really hope that a lot of police departments and folks who are out there doing the job every day will understand that, because I think that is a very common piece of misinformation that can kill people.
All right, 2 segments down, 1 to go. Thank you again for the 3 of you being here, and we will be right back with more of our coverage.